just spent the movie came out on VOD today, and I just had to spend 2 hours adjusting my television. So, you guys, it's so depressing to land on VOD. It's so that you don't have to. Anyway.
Do you sit with your nose right up to the television?
Yeah, I honestly, it was 2 hours, and it was so frustrating. And, but it's weird because when it's your own film, you realize how you've been watching television like everything was all. Anyway.
Well, now I'm picturing you going to Best Buy and changing all the settings on the television so they'll be ready when people stream this. I want to ask you this just to start off. Who is David Bowie to you? And is your answer to that question today, this night, different than it would have been before you started this project?
Yeah, for sure. The word that popped into my head when I heard those come out of your mouth was at this moment. The word is too strong. It's almost like a guru. I mean, I feel like I kind of, since I've been making the film, constantly in any situations, like, what would David do? And so when I went into the project, I had no idea. I liked his music. I'd never read interviews or watched interviews or studied him, and had no idea the infinite wisdom that he had. I mean, obviously knew he's a great artist, but so that all of that was revelatory, and it came to me at a point in my life where I really needed, both creatively, to have some new avenues, and emotionally, and just evolving. He came into my life at a very good time, both times, when I was a teenager and then at 47.
Did he shape you as a teenager too?
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably am speaking for most people, perhaps, that Bowie came into my life 12 or 13, was the first artist that I curated. It's such a critical, pivotal moment. It's like right around puberty. So he had a profound impact, introduced me to culture, identity, and that would have been more than enough for a lifetime. And then this came about, and yeah.
I mean, I want to hear more about how he influenced you as an artist, but I think first I want to learn more just about the sense of scale of this project. I mean, you were given access to the Bowie archives. You're the first person to ever be given full access to the Bowie archives. I don't know how big those are, and I think just so I can get my head around it, do you remember your very first day having access, what you saw that day and what you were thinking?
Yes, and FYI, I'm sure there's other documentarians in the room who had the experience of going into archives, and for those who aren't documentarians, they always imagine it's this like, so what does it look like? Like it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Citizen Kane or something.
That is exactly what I was picturing. Yeah.
When I went to Kurt's art, when I went to see the Cobain archives for the first time, it was at a storage facility in South LA, and I remember I went into this room where, if you've ever had stuff in storage, they bring your boxes in. There were like 5 boxes in a fluorescent lit room. But the Bowie archive, which is in Jersey, which is run by one woman, as soon as I opened the door, it's immense. I mean, it took me 2 years to screen through all the media on a daily basis.
2 years just to screen?
2 years of screening. The process was this: a year of reading everything I could on Bowie. It took us about 3 years total, start to bottom, to bring everything into our building. 2 years of screening, a year of writing, 2 years of editing, and 18 months of sound and color.
I mean, a year of editing is surprising because I've read that you usually, using
script.
Cobain, like immerse yourself in Cobain, and then you're able to write a script in like 3 days, 5 days.
Yeah, no, this script was not that easy. This
What
script was
happened?
really, what happened was I didn't know how to write an experience. I didn't want, all of my other films have been very linear, chronological narratives. and sort of all embedded with subtext, but with a very kind of overt through line. And this film was designed from conception to not be a biographical narrative, but to achieve the same goal, hopefully, that biographical narratives do, which is to arrive at a truth. I think that what I was hoping to do was arrive at a truth without facts.
Truth without fact. What does that mean to a documentary filmmaker?
Well, the opposite of fact to me is experience. It's something intangible. So, I'll put it this way. I went and saw the Bob Marley jukebox musical in London last week. And I'm watching, and I didn't think I was going to last for more than half the show before I walked in. And I really liked the music. And it was like I was grooving on the music. And, like a jukebox musical, there's probably like 12 scenes total in the whole show. And there were all these big events in Bob's life. The One Love concert. And I was thinking, watching it, why is this Bob Marley? Like, why is him having an affair with Miss Jamaica? That's not why I'm going to see a Bob Marley show. And I was like, and it's not very illuminating. It doesn't tell me anything about him per se. And I was like, wow, this whole show are filled with scenes that don't tell me anything. And I was obviously reflecting because of this experience. And I think that this is just very specific to Bowie. Kurt required a more grounded presentation. And as with all my work, I try to create films that aren't so much about the subjects, but that personify the subjects, that become kind of the kind of Bowie uses this word somewhere in the film, like the quintessence it's like extracting the juice from a grape.
Making wine?
Yes, and this is the wine. So Bowie is someone who I think is can't really be defined, but he can be experienced, and I think he provided the way I constructed the film was by incorporating and employing and studying his techniques to art and his methodologies. So I mean, starting from the idea that Bowie, all artists invite us to project, and see ourselves in the work, but not all our artists consciously construct canvases to create that sort of dynamic relationship, which Bowie did. There was an interview with David that I listened to, it's not in the film, early on with Mick Rock, where Mick, it was 3 months before Ziggy Stardust came out, and he said, so David, I understand you got this Ziggy Stardust thing coming out. It's like a space age concept album. And David's like, oh no, man, I just mentioned laser, ray gun, and moonbeams, and that's it. It's like 2 songs. They're just gonna fill in the blanks. And I was like, that is kind of like, you can listen to a Bowie song over and over and over again. It doesn't tell you much about David Jones. And partially because of the way he wrote, where he was leaning into consonants and vowels and sounds. But we all have exact meanings for us of these songs. And that is based upon our experiences and how we fill in the blanks and how we project. So that was a
relationship between artist and audience.
Yeah, so this is a film that is inviting the audience from the very first moment to participate and to be a part of the experience. And then in terms of the mechanics of the film, everything that I did to create the film, David is telling us in the film. I have this weird experience now when I watch the film now that it's done, where he's literally, every line he says was incorporated into the process. So the best way I could set it up, and this was probably a critical decision, is I'm not an editor. I can edit, but I'm not an editor.
You just won an award for editing.
It was from the Critics' Choice, so it's
a Critics' Choice.
I guess
it's not the random people's choice.
It's sort of, but which was, I don't mean to diminish the word. I was very happy to receive it. But if anyone here edits, the difference between an editor and someone who's not editors, I have no idea how to manage my equipment. I have no idea. I have like 50 tracks open at all times. And I edited the film on an 11-inch laptop with no external monitor. It was,
For an IMAX movie?
yeah. It's so, I've had the weirdest, at Toronto, we were at the big IMAX theater there, and Tom brought me out, and that screen's so big, and I walked down, I was like, this is so weird, this was cut on a laptop, and I don't understand how it's so big. And that sounds, if anyone edits, you know what I just described is nothing to be proud of. It's an admission of ignorance and stupidity, really. There's nothing good about it. But it helped for this project, because this project I needed to create. I had this idea, it wasn't my idea, it was David's, that there was no, I wanted the film to feel spontaneous and unrehearsed and organic. And that's a really hard thing to force onto something. But from listening to David, you learn that there are no mistakes, there's just happy accidents. And I would pretty much say that a huge chunk of what you just experienced, maybe 70%, were accidents. But as Bob Evans would say, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So the situation, the environment was created to make accidents and to have nobody there to tell me that they were, how to clean them up. And so that became part of the fabric of the film.
Is that what you mean by feeling Bowie in you, inspiring you? Like, you're a creative person making a film about a creator, talking about the art of creation.
Getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, this was, you can't get further from your comfort zone than sitting down after spending, at the point I started editing, we had nothing left in the budget. So I actually couldn't hire an editor. We had a locked budget with no contingency, and we had it before I knew I was doing Bowie. It was from a series of films that I set up, and there was so much media that the Bowie archives had that we weren't budgeted for, so we had to bring all that in, exhausting the entire editorial budget on assistant editors to bring the material in. And we were 3.5 years from the finish line at that point. So, and the stress of that helped. I mean, it all contributed in a weird way to and to your question. So, where you asked me about the script, and like with Kurt, so I went through all the material. I wrote the script in 3 days. I was kind of working backwards from his suicide. Why did he kill himself? And so it sort of plotted itself out pretty quickly. But as I sat here, I just didn't know how to do it. But that was part of the joy, was having to discover. And it's not like, I don't want to try to suggest that I reinvented the wheel or anything. It's just a movie. But it was a movie and other people, I guess, have probably worked in similar styles. I just have not. So it was a very foreign endeavor for me. And that was very Bowie-esque.
Well, one of the things I really admire about it is, you're right, this is a documentary of somebody's sitting down expecting to see talking heads, Bowie was the greatest, here's what happens. You make the deliberate choice to not say any of that. You leave out the first wife, you leave out Duncan, his son. But what you do is you kind of nudge us to think, you'd nudge us to think about bigger questions connected to Bowie. Watching this, I thought a lot about aging, seeing several Bowies stacked up next to each other, Bowies finishing each other's songs from different time periods. You ask us to think about mortality very much, because everyone in here we go in knowing the loss of Bowie, feeling the loss of Bowie. Some people think that Bowie started the whole chaos effect of everything going wrong in 2016. And I was wondering if some of that felt very personal to you, because I heard that during the making of this film, you had your own sort of brush with mortality.
Yeah, oh, it had everything to do with it. I mean, thank you for asking. Uh, it wasn't the film that did it. What Amy's alluding to is on January 5th, 2017, I was moderating a screening for the film Tower at the Silent Film Theater, and at about 7:30, I had a massive heart attack and flatlined in the ER. Fortunately, we were close to Cedars-Sinai, so I flatlined in the ER for a couple minutes and was in a coma for a week. And that was about 3 months before I started going through the material. And when I came out of my coma, I was not a changed person at all. I mean, the first words I said to the doctor are like, I'm shooting a very big pilot for Marvel. I need to be on set on Monday. And he goes, you're not going anywhere. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I pulled the plugs out. I was that guy you see in the movies who literally starts pulling the plugs to because they wouldn't properly discharge me, and I had to be in an audition at Burbank, and that's how far gone I was. I mean, I was really a man child. It was like just, and you could see why I probably had a heart attack, because the person who wakes up from a heart attack and says, I got to get to work right now, it kind of explains sort of maybe they don't have a lot of balance or perspective.
Did you know you were a sitcom character at that point in your life?
No, but it was very meta, because the night I woke up, I watched all that jazz on my phone. Like I was like, it's an experience. I had a heart attack. It's like I've never been in the hospital before. So I was really messed up, and not so funny. It was I have 3 children. It was I was in a coma on my daughter's birthday, which is also David's birthday, and I woke up a year to the day David died. So it was intense, and as I was listening to David, everything he was saying about learning how to appreciate each moment, and I mean all this stuff of the brevity of life, and do you really want to go do a job, to make $10 extra tomorrow, rather than go do something that's better for your soul? I mean, I feel like all these questions resonate, whether you're a filmmaker or a day laborer or a police officer, whatever your vocation, they all speak to all of us. And so yes, he's David Bowie, the pop icon rock star, talking to someone, that's so far from that world, and being able to connect and communicate. But he really, it was a message, both emotionally and spiritually and creatively, that was such a gift, at 25 years into my career, to on the professional way, to have someone come in who's, not like network notes or anything, and just kind of like, this is how you do it, and don't be afraid, just go for it. And then emotionally and spiritually, is providing that kind of guidance, roadmap. It was just, it could not have come at a better time. And so this film that you guys just saw, that begins with a resurrection, is incredibly personal. It probably, without knowing that story, I don't know if one would arrive there, but it was, I had a crazy experience at the premiere of this film, where it was very difficult. Obviously, it was 7 years, and it was very lonely and isolating. And I sat in a room with 2,300 people, and it was like midnight. It was on a Monday night, and everyone in the room disappeared, and I couldn't remember assembling the film, and it was like this shadow engulfed everyone, and David was speaking directly to me. And it was just an out-of-body experience. There was nobody in the room but him and myself, and everything he said was just pointed directly at me as if I was hearing it for the first time. And I still have that experience with the film when I come back and see it, that it just feels like it's a great reminder of what to do tomorrow, you know? I probably would watch The Watcher all day tomorrow if it wasn't for Bowie.
I mean, I've read, and I'm curious to know more about this, actually. I read in passing that you said that one of your favorite bits of Bowie footage that you came across in the archives was a very awkward interview on TV. I think it was like in the late 80s, maybe, where Bowie was being interviewed like on television, one of those morning-ish kind of shows,
Yeah.
by a woman who seemed to have no idea who she was and who he was and what they were supposed to talk about.
Yeah, it was so two parts of that story. The first was the first day I got the job. I kind of I forced myself to. But the first day I was working on the film, Tony Visconti, David's producer, invited me to his recording studio to listen to some stems, some original tracks, and he gave me the song "Signa Committee," which I play at the end of, ostensibly, it's not really the first half of the film, it's like 2/3 in, where David sings, "I want to live, I want to live, I want to live." And Tony played that and muted out all the instrumentation, and when he muted out all the instrumentation, you can hear David sobbing uncontrollably as he's saying, "I want to live, I want to live, I want to live." And here's a young man at the very beginning of his life, just starting out, 20 years old, singing with the kind of angst of someone on their last day on this earth, with an understanding back then of the brevity of time we have. So that was really important to hear and understand that. And in fact, David says in the film, when you realize you've lived more days than you have in front of you, it's when you can really start to appreciate life. And it's one of the things that he says that it's true for me, but I think David understood it from the very beginning. And as he said, he set out to have the greatest adventure of anyone he knew. And so I think he had this appreciation right from the start. You had asked me another question. I went off script.
The interviewer who didn't know
Right.
who he
So
was.
so part of that understanding of the brevity of life was he really, and I met with David once, and the one thing I took from it was how present he was. There was nothing else happening other than what was between us. So these two ideas go hand in hand, and I was going through all the footage, and as you can imagine, as you get to the later years, there's more per tour. So you can get through the first up to 74 in like a day and a half, and then it just starts dragging out. I got to the 80s, the Glass Spider tour. There was a lot of footage, and it wasn't my favorite moment in Bowie's trajectory. And there was this interview with a Canadian journalist, like a MTV type journalist, and it was at this point where people like Robin Leach and Entertainment Tonight, David was mainstream, and he was being interviewed by mainstream reporters, not rock journalists like Lisa Robinson, who understood his instincts and his influences.
Moved into a different world.
He totally moved into this other world where David Bowie would sit with someone who had never heard a David Bowie song, and this young journalist sits down. And David, I was watching the pre-roll before it went to air, and David he's like, "So, have you read anything interesting lately?" And they're talking about some book she read, and he's then sharing some books that he read, and he's trying to engage her in this kind of quasi-literary conversation. And I thought to myself, he sees every moment as an opportunity for an exchange. And it's remarkable. You know, there was never saw him talk down, look down. It was just it's an amazing way to go through life. You know, I was so envious of. Well, not envious. I'm very glad. It's better late than never. You know? So I'm glad at 54 I was able to kind of absorb some of that.
I mean, we've talked so much about this film, sort of, I think, like emotionally, spiritually. I'm kind of curious to know a little bit more technically about it, because my first impression watching this at an IMAX screening was just, this is so dense. And I had this feeling that there were like subliminal things happening in this film that you put in that I didn't even know about, like in the sound mix, like in the visuals, like how, tell me just even about the sound mix, about creating a soundscape for something like this.
So I think when the film, as I mentioned earlier, was conceived before I knew I was doing Bowie back in 2015. I had created something called a format called the IMAX Music Experience, and the premise of that was that we were going to take over the science museums at 6 o'clock at night and do a series of 40-minute films related to my favorite musical acts: the Beatles, the Stones, Jay-Z. You know, 7 o'clock Beatles, 8 o'clock Zeppelin, you know, whatever. And they would be, you know, I don't want to say laserium. And by the way, when I say laserium, I'm not, I'm simply referring to an experience.
I've had some wonderful times.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah. But I just, you know, it was like, okay, we don't need to know that the Beatles are from Liverpool. Just let me hear them in the best sound system in the world, and let me see their footage cleaned up better than I've ever seen it, and let me see some never before seen stuff, and I'll be excited. Like, that's a good time for me. So from the very beginning, the idea was to only work with stems, with music that we can have access to, all of the original stems, the different instruments, and not remix or not remaster, but actually mix from scratch and spread them around the room, so that it felt like when you were in the second to third to the last row, there was some volume and some girth to it, as opposed, because, you know, usually the sound starts here and it dissipates out by the time it gets there. And I've been going to movies my whole life. I always sit in the back, and I just like 2 months ago learned, oh no, if you sit up front, it's really loud. It's like, if you want sound, sit up front. But I wanted to create a sort of equilibrium. And Paul Massey, who mixed the film, who is a absolute virtuoso. I mean, it was just one of the great pleasures of my life collaborating with the sound team. You know, Paul would say, and he's right, that all mixing begins here. This is where all action is orientated, and that the surrounds and the back channels are generally there for support. And I was like, yeah, but Paul, there's nothing up here. There's no north, south, east, or west. This is a mandala. It's directionless, and the form is the content. So it's actually in here. That's where the film is. It's not here. It's creating this experience is what we're trying to channel. And so that was a big, I mean, again, everyone who worked on the film had to kind of really step outside of the comfort zone. With sound design, because there's no picture that we're kind of, yeah, there was Foley work, but
Curated Foley work?
You know, you see him walking, you know, there's some steps and stuff. But, you know, when it came down to creating sounds, John Werhurst and Nina Hartstone, who won the Academy Award for designing Bohemian Rhapsody, they had some great skills that they were able to bring in from Bohemian that like went over my head. Like, they rented out a soccer stadium football stadium in London, and played the entire soundtrack through the speakers so they can record natural reverb. And I remember being at the mix and going, Paul, couldn't you just do the reverb by hitting this button over here? And he's like, yes, that's true, but it wouldn't sound as good. Most people do not hear reverb. Like, this is such a subtle aspect to these back speakers. I had this idea that every speaker had to have a different person, like David. Like it could. That was my big thing from day one. That we couldn't use like just a wall of applause. That I wanted to feel very specific and like it was very alive.
I heard you say theme park ride a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it was, well, just an experience, just only because of the idea of an experience, something very kind of visceral and immersive. Um, John and Nina, because a lot of the sound is not like, there's like, during Aladdin Sane, there's this scene, and I can't explain it, where we're spotting the film. I said, can I get a sound of a bowling ball rolling down, and when it hits the edit point on this next shot, make it a strike, and then take the sound and wrap it around the room. Now, why? I don't know, but when I was spotting the film, it seemed like a good idea. Because with the spotting session, we had 9 spotting sessions, 27 hours, on Zoom with the team in London, and we were writing the film. We're throwing ideas out because the movie was that sort of film. Moonage, I wanted machine guns. Like, I don't think I thought of that before I got on the call with them, but I'm like just spitballing and throwing shit out.
Added machine guns?
Oh, and the song, yeah, they're all over the place. Helicopters going everywhere. And so, it was really exciting. And exhausting. There's a tremendous amount of, when we got to the mix, there's 100 plus tracks. Obviously, you can really only hear 3. So you're right. There's a lot of subliminal stuff, a lot of roller coaster sounds. My favorite, I use it in every film, the sound of a roller coaster a wooden roller coaster going up the tracks, like, and then. Yeah, so the sound design, it wasn't following picture, it was leading. So I'd like to say the film was written 3 or 4 different times. The one place it was not written was the edit room. The script was intact before I got to the edit room, but I wrote the script for a year, and then John and Nina and I really felt were writing the film and the sound design. Paul, when we got to the mix, to go back to Aladdin Sane, the direction I gave to Paul was I wanted to feel like it's going off the rails. And so, like, for the shot here, David's talking, take the volume and run it over him. Just like take him out. He's like, but he's in the middle of it. I go, don't worry about it, just go for it. It's like, and it's like wobbly. And so during the scene Aladdin Sane in this film, there's no information provided. Nothing is being stated. I don't even think there's interview bites. The whole scene exists to kind of capture David's mindset when he was in Los Angeles. And that was like this film in general, like Los Angeles, there's no footage of Bowie and being whacked out on drugs in LA. Other than this one tiny thing, cracked actor. So how do you convey that? This is so much more interesting when you don't have the footage. And I always talk to editors about this, where that which we don't have is not a curse, it's a blessing, it's a gift. Because if you have the footage, as an artist, I don't know, really there's not that much for me to do. I can color it and I could shape it. But the moment when David that leads into Cracked Actor, where he's riding in a limo and he says, there's a wax museum out there. There's this like chaotic montage that follows it with a lot of Kenneth Anger. And that was out of pure necessity, the need to convey which was never captured, both psychologically and physically. And it's interesting, this film received an R rating and is an M15 everywhere. You can't see this film if you're over 15. I mean, if you're under 15 outside the US. It's got 1 second and 19 frames of nudity spread out over 3 shots, no profanity and no violence. It's implied, so the scene that I'm referring to, you feel that something tawdry is going on, but you don't see anything. It's just all through juxtaposition of the montage and the way that the audio's. There's like 7 frames of the mustard scene from Scorpio Rising, which is, if you know the film, it's a. But in general, it's that sort of stuff I find so exciting, frustrating to construct and create, but incredibly exhilarating to arrive at when it works.
I love that. Well, on behalf of everybody here, thank you for taking us on this ride with this film.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And yes, it's. I just like to say thank you so much for coming, and how proud I am at this moment in time to be a documentarian. There are so many great documentaries out right now. If I may take a moment, I'm a huge fan of Andy's film, Last Ride Home. Yeah, I highly recommend people see that. And the Bonnie's fantastic. Power of Love is fantastic. Retrograde's great. I mean, we are living. It's not the golden age. There are too many young people calling it the golden age. The mid 2000s for me were the golden age for theatrical nonfiction. I don't think we'll ever see that again, where year after year we had films grossing 70 million, 50 million. I mean, it was just incredible. This is it's a golden age for streaming documentaries. Theatrically, we need to push. And I would just encourage everyone in this room. I find that a lot of documentarians I speak to don't see documentaries in movie theaters. And I really encourage everyone, well, you guys, I'm just preaching to the choir here, but it's kind of depressing to see movies like All That Breeze, which it's a masterpiece. And there's 4 people, for a weekend. We need to come out, not just for free IDA screenings, but to support theatrical nonfiction. It's a incredible medium to work in. I feel so blessed to be a part of the community. And sorry, I got on a soapbox because I have a microphone.
Get on a bigger soapbox. It's a good soapbox.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.